Welcome back, welcome back. At the recent meeting of the heads of the North Atlantic Treaty countries, NATO of course, it was decided to welcome 2 new members to the club, Albania and Croatia, but not to accelerate membership for 2 others, Georgia and Ukraine. However, the Secretary-General of NATO did say that he was in no doubt that the 2 would be members in time, even despite the fact that Russia is vehemently opposed. So where will NATO stop, and how antagonistic to Russia should it be, if at all? I'm joined by a former Foreign and Defence Secretary for the UK who knows more about NATO than he's had hot dinners. Anyway, it's a pleasure to welcome Sir Malcolm Rifkind. Malcolm, what happened there, it didn't surprise you, did it, that those countries didn't get entry?
It didn't surprise me, and it didn't disappoint me either. It was a rather curious situation where President Bush and 1 or 2 other countries, primarily new members of NATO from Central and Eastern Europe, were in favour of membership, whereas most of Europe was very concerned about it. And I think the reason why is a very simple and straightforward reason. Most people think of NATO as an organization that is operating in Afghanistan and in various parts of the world, and it's doing that, and some of that is very good and very worthwhile. But NATO is mainly a mutual defense organization. That's why it was created. Each country that joins NATO is committed to go to the help of any other member that might be attacked. And therefore, if you are accepting new members, you have to realize this is not just a political association. This is entering into a treaty obligation which might end up with committing you to actually fighting on their behalf. So it's a pretty solemn and serious decision. It takes time to make sure you get it right.
And given that it started off as protecting the members from the communists, from the communist bloc, from Soviet Russia and so on, who are we protecting each other from now?
Well, there's 2 aspects to this. Of course, Russia is no longer a threat. We have a good relationship with Russia, not perfect, but a lot better than it ever was during the Cold War. It is almost impossible to imagine that becoming a new Cold War in the old sense. But, you know, none of us can predict what the future holds. Russia is not yet a democracy. Let us just imagine, purely hypothetical, I'm not predicting this, but it's possible.
They say they are.
It's possible, yeah, sure. But imagine in 10 years' time if some extreme nationalist took power in Russia.
Mr. Zhirinovsky.
For example, Mr. Zhirinovsky, who's been a pretty wild man in the past. And Russia remains a nuclear superpower and so forth. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but you know, you can't be certain. 5 years before the Soviet Union collapsed, nobody predicted that you'd be having an independent Ukraine, an independent Lithuania within 5-6 years.
No, that's fine. I remember when it was the first interview that President or acting President Putin had done with a foreigner in March 2000, 4 weeks before he was elected. And I said to him at one point, well, could Russia join NATO? And he said, I see no reason why not. He then went on to say, as long as we're treated as an equal of others and so on. But I see no reason why not. But it's inconceivable, you would say, is it?
I think it's highly unlikely for 2 reasons. First of all, Russia is not a democracy. It's not a totalitarian state like it used to be, but it's an authoritarian system. It does not yet come up to the democratic standards required. It is not the public who decide who the president of Russia is going to be. Mr. Putin has anointed his successor, and that Russia therefore doesn't qualify. But there's a second point, and it goes back to my earlier comments. NATO is not like the Council of Europe, or it's not a political organization. It is a mutual defense pact. And the possibility of integrating Russia's military into NATO, I don't think is attractive, either from NATO's point of view or from Russia's point of view.
You wrote an article just a week or 2 ago saying, which was headlined, NATO shouldn't advance too far east. Was that because it's unnecessary to frighten, anger Russia?
I don't think Russia should decide who the members of NATO are. I think that would be intolerable. The decision as to who joins NATO is for NATO to decide and for the applicant country. And don't misunderstand me, Ukraine and Georgia, in many respects, are very impressive countries. Apart from the Baltic states, they are the only 2 parts of the old Soviet Union which are moving in a serious way towards democratic government. their electorates really have real elections and have a real choice as to who their government's going to be. So I have a lot of time for Ukraine. I think it's a fantastic country that's developed a long way. But it's still not yet sufficiently determined its own identity. As we know, within Ukraine, half the population look to the West, half the population still look to Russia as their closest ally and the country with whom they identify with. Opinion surveys in Ukraine suggest quite a large majority don't want to join NATO. So I think until these issues are addressed and resolved, I think the question of membership of NATO is premature. I think it could be more divisive than unifying.
There's one other country that we've had hostile relations with, but in the last week or two the situation has thawed. Should France rejoin?
Well, France is a member of NATO. The only thing, since the days of General de Gaulle, France decided that it did not want to be part of what is called the integrated military structure of NATO, by which I mean NATO being a defense pact. It has meant that even in peacetime, you have a framework of military cooperation with multinational command. And the French under de Gaulle said, that's not for us, we don't want to be part of that. It's not been as much of a problem as might have been expected way back in de Gaulle's time, because in any real crisis, the French are on side. Yeah. It's more been a political problem than a real issue of identity. The French have always associated with any threat to the security of Europe or of the Western alliance. And so the fact that President Sarkozy has said, maybe it's now time to rejoin in a full sense NATO, that's good, but it's a political decision, just as de Gaulle's original decision was political.
Well, it's a great thaw, and I'm sure it's all due to Mrs. Sarkozy. Mrs. Sarkozy-Bruni, who's brought these two nations together.
She has changed the nature of modern life as we know it, so who knows what's still to come.
Hear, hear. Malcolm, thanks a million for being with us.
Thank you very much.
And now, next week's Democratic primary in Pennsylvania. It's been flagged as Hillary's last chance against Barack, her final shot at overtaking Obama's lead among the delegates. But few observers expect Mrs. Clinton, even if Obama does well, to retire from the field immediately. So what should we look out for? I'm joined now by one of Mrs. Clinton's strongest allies, General Wesley Clark. Wesley, great to have you with us. Does that summary
there...
Nice
to be with you, David.
Thank you. Does that summary there, that's what people here are saying. How do you see it at the moment?
Well, I think she's going to work very hard in Pennsylvania. Obviously, it's been a long time since the last voting. And so both candidates have really worked the Pennsylvania landscape. They've picked up endorsements. They're putting lots of money into advertising. It's a big battle, and I don't think that it's going to be decisive necessarily, but I do think that Senator Clinton's going to do very well there. I think it's a state, first of all, she's got some family roots there. She's got lots of sympathy among the population. You can feel it. And third, she's done very well in the debate that they did the other night, and I think she's on a roll.
And at the same time, I mean, obviously, in this great game of campaigns, on the one hand, Barack Obama is saying that she needs to win by at least 15% in order to stay in the race, and I'm sure you're going to give us a much lower figure that you're sure she'll get to. I mean, does she have a target?
Well, I don't know that, and I'm not working the inside of the campaign. I have to be very clear about that, David. Having run one of these campaigns, I know how hard they're working. I know what the pressures are, and you can't be a part-time player if you're going to be on the inside of one of these campaigns, because these people are working 18 hours a day. They've been working at this pace for months and months. Our staff is terrific, and they're going to keep on going. They haven't given a number, not even to themselves, to the best of my knowledge. Their mission is to do as well as they can. The polls are all over the place. Some of the polls show her just a few points ahead. Some of the polls show her ahead by double digits. And we know that that there's a lot of jiggering around with polls. They don't all say the same thing, and sometimes they're influenced in certain ways by the way the question is asked, or even by some people who are trying to get their opinion registered more than once. So I think, you know, everybody's sort of waiting to see how this turns out.
And in terms of the very fact of having two candidates still beating it out at the moment. There's been a lot of worries on the Democratic side that this is bad, this is an easy run for McCain and so on and so forth. At the same time, I can remember back in '68, I don't think the California primary was until June the 15th anyway. But do you think it's a good, healthy thing to have two candidates still going at it? Or would it be better for the Democrats if this thing was settled?
Well, it cuts both ways, David, and this is the issue, really. On the one hand, it's a wonderful thing in Pennsylvania and then in May in Indiana. People who normally don't get into the primary elections in a big way, they're not like, they're states, they don't have the traditions of Iowa and New Hampshire, where people expect to be courted, where lots of citizens volunteer to go to call centers and call their neighbors and drag them out to the polls and beseech them to support a particular candidate. In Indiana and Pennsylvania, the next two states coming up, the voters, they see politics more at a distance. They're normally told who the principal candidates will be because they've already been selected, and they get a few advertisements on the TV, and then people vote. And this is an entirely different experience. It's a much more moving experience for the population. They're much more personally engaged. They're going to come out of it with a lot better feel for what the race is about, what the issues are, what the candidates stand for, at least what the Democrats stand for. That's all incredibly positive. The negative, of course, is that people take strong sides, and the way it used to work, the way people thought it would work, is it would be over in 3 or 4 weeks after the voting started. People would have different favorites in the Democratic Party, and then they'd sit back at a cocktail party or over tea, and they'd chit-chat and say, well, you know, I was supporting so-and-so, and he was, well, yes, but, and then they just make up. But this has gone on for a long time, and there are strong feelings on both sides for the backers of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. And it's going to be very important for the Democratic Party to come back together after this. I think it can, but it's going to be its own challenge.
And John McCain, according to the latest polls we've seen here, edging into the lead against both the candidates, further ahead of Hillary than Barack Obama, and losing to Barack Obama in 1 or 2 of them. Do you think that John McCain is using this period wisely and well?
Well, he's trying to use it, certainly, but he's had his own problems along the way. I think he's benefiting from the fact, obviously, that the Democrats are tearing at each other, and that he's only getting some of the shrapnel effect from their debates. But John McCain has had his own problems during this period. He's not raising funds. He still has people on the Christian right who are not strongly in his court. He's made some embarrassing bobbles with his knowledge of the situation of Iraq. He can't seem to differentiate between Sunni and Shia Islam at the appropriate time, and it's not clear that he's going to come out of this with any lasting advantage. And what happens from week to week in the polls? These are snapshots. They can be used in fundraising, perhaps, or in appeals for public support, but they're not of lasting significance. I think that whoever wins this Democratic nomination is going to come out very strong. The latest polls in the United States, for example, on Iraq, are showing that, again, the opinion is swinging strongly toward the negative on Iraq. And this can't be good news for John McCain.
Do you think McCain, Condoleezza Rice would make a tough duo to fight against, or because of what you just said about Iraq, do you think not?
Well, I think it's in John McCain's interest to try to have a national security election. I mean, that's his strong suit. He can play on his background, his great record of service as a naval aviator, his heroics as a prisoner of war. This is all in his favor. But the specifics of Iraq are not likely to be in his favor. Condoleezza Rice is caught up in that, and she's caught up in the 9/11 issue. The truth is that most Americans really don't want to go back and reopen the box, but if she's on the ticket, she will be. And you may remember that George Tenet, in his book, said very strongly that he warned her in July and begged her to do something about the threats coming from the intelligence community indicating Osama bin Laden was about to make a move in the United States, and she had no recollection of it. She took no specific actions on it. This is a huge potential issue as she contemplates getting on the ticket. I think that she may be flirting with it, but I think it's unlikely. I think it's more likely that John McCain's going to pick someone who's already been out there, a Mitt Romney, a governor from a populous state like maybe Florida. There are a lot of good candidates, and my guess would be Condoleezza Rice will not be on that ticket.
And who knows, perhaps Barack Obama will choose Wesley Clark. That would be a turn-up for the books. Thank you very much for being with us, Wesley.
Thank you very much, David. It's good to be with you.
In a minute, the twice Oscar-nominated actor John Hurt will be joining us right here after the news headlines.